Well, welcome to Old Classic Car, and we are back in the garage. It seems like quite a long time since we've done a bit of an update out here. I mean, the weather's been against it and I've been very busy lately, so I thought it's high time we do a bit of an update on this, the 1950 Ford V8 Pilot, which is a car that regulars will know we bought fairly recently, maybe a couple of months ago, something like that. And it's a car with very much two personalities to it, if you like. Once it's warmed through, up and running, it's a great starter and it drives beautifully. The problem is, when you go to start it from cold in the morning, on a regular morning, it will refuse to start on the electric starter, despite putting new battery on it and so on, which I'll go into a bit more detail in a moment. It just plain refuses to start using the electric starter. The only way to get it to fire up, if you're lucky, is on this handle, on the good old starting handle, but it's a heavy old engine to turn over, so clearly that really isn't a long-term strategy. So at the moment, basically it's just a very expensive paperweight, this car at the moment, so clearly that's not a situation that can carry on. So I'm just going to have a bit of a talk about what I've been doing lately in terms of trying to diagnose what the problems are and how maybe that we can get around them and just try and improve things, because it's had a couple of updates over the last year or two before we bought it. It had a different carburettor fitted, a Stromberg 97, which by all accounts is meant to be an improvement, but I'm not quite sure if that's the case here. But more importantly, it had, or has still, electronic ignition. It's got an electronic ignition system on it, and that is what's causing the problem. It's a very diva-ish. It just refuses to start from cold using the electric starter. No matter what battery or how many batteries you have joined together, it just refuses. It will not work at all. And I can only think that perhaps it's not getting the full wallop of power, the full amount of voltage that it needs in order for the gubbins inside the electronic distributor to actually work. I can only think that that's what the problem is here. But anyway, let's go and have a quick look under the bonnet at the engine itself, and I'll talk you through some of the things I've been doing lately to try and diagnose and, more importantly, fix this very irritating problem. Now, when you read up about these electronic ignition systems, they all say you have to have good earths. So I've spent quite a bit of time redoing earths, beefing up battery leads and so on, because the original lead, which I think we've got over here, was pretty poor. This is the one that was on, and that, even for a 12 volt system, that's not really up to snuff. So we'll file that under B, I think. So we've got better earths on here now, but it still refuses to start. This is the Optima battery, which I think I probably mentioned in a previous video. These are recommended for use on the V8 Pilots, and in fact most cars with hefty engines that still run the 6 volt system, because I know, because this is on 6 volt, that 6 volt systems can work very well, and the engine in the Dodge pickup is very similar in capacity to this, so there's no reason why it shouldn't work. These Optima batteries are renowned for having a lot of oomph, plenty of cranking power and continuous cranking power, so that's good. So I put that on, bought one of those brand new, and yeah, it certainly throws it over a lot better than it was the case before with the traditional lead acid battery that was fitted. I don't think there was anything wrong with the battery that was on it, but this has certainly got a lot more grunt to it. But despite that, it still will not start. So I thought I would go back to first principles and just have a look at the feed that goes into the distributor itself. So it was out with the good old trusty meter. It's not anything fancy, this is a fairly cheap one, but it does the job. So it was out with that and testing some of the feeds into this electronic ignition. Now the distributor is way down the front there, at the front of the engine. If I can get my little torch here, you may just be able to see it. If I can position the torch somewhere there, that shiny silver thing down there, which hopefully you can see if I try zooming in. There it is down there. That's the distributor. It's actually easier to get to from underneath. It has a different coil as well. It has one of these flamethrower coils fitted as well. But the important thing is that it gets the full 6 volts for starting, because otherwise it just will not work. So I got the meter out and I had a look at the feed, which is over down here, that red wire down there. That's the feed from the ignition switch. So when you turn the ignition switch to on, and flick the little ignition switch, you put a meter over it, you are getting 6 and a bit volts, which is great. So you're getting the full feed from the battery over there, through the wiring, into here, and down into the distributor, which is great news. But with my youthful assistant on board the other day, I found that once he goes to start it and crank it over on the starter, that drops off to sort of the high 4s, about 4.8 volts, something like that. So I thought, well, that's not going to do the job. That's just not going to be enough. It may be enough for the old point ignition, because that's a lot more tolerant of sort of slightly flaky voltage feeds and so on, whereas modern electronics aren't. They either work or they don't. There's very little grey area usually with something like this. So I thought, okay, so I got up a second battery. This may be the original one off it, actually, I'm not quite sure. There are a couple of 6-volt batteries kicking around, because this is on 6 volts, and also the 4CV is as well. And I arranged the leads so that this was jumping the car, but not completely. I wired in the earth, the positive, from here to the battery on the car, but the live feed went straight from battery number 2, I hope this is making sense, the live feed straight from here, straight to the distributor, so that the voltage didn't drop off when you hit the starter, so that the full 6 volts from the charged up second battery, which I had over there, went straight into here. And when you put the meter on, you got the full 6 volts even when the starter was turning, so that's great. So even though the starter was taking up a fair bit of power from the battery fitted to the car, the second battery was giving an uninterrupted feed straight to the distributor, so that was a good test of the Dizzy. But even despite that, it would not start at all. So carrying on with the idea of first principles, we check for a spark, and there is no sign of a spark at all, which can't be right at all. And while I had one or two of the plugs out, I noticed that despite spinning the engine over quite a lot, the plugs aren't getting wet either, so that doesn't seem right either. And as I said before, it did have a Stromberg carburettor fitted, an aftermarket carburettor fitted, and I thought, okay, so in with the box of spares that came with it was the original Ford carburettor, the Ford branded carburettor. So I thought, well, I think I will go back to the original setup. And the other thing I didn't like particularly, because there's the mechanical fuel pump, and there is the carburettor, but the replacement carburettor that was on there, it required, where is it? Have I got it to hand somewhere? On my trusty trolley. It required this thing, which is a fuel pressure regulator. Hope you can see that. So presumably it was flooding the carburettor. The output from the mechanical pump was overpowering the carburettor, so it needed this to be plumbed into the line, which was over here. So that was in the line there, the fuel feed into the carburettor, so just added complication. So you had a non-original carburettor which didn't seem to be working entirely as it should be, because the plugs weren't getting wet, and it also required this thing, which is not the greatest thing, but you know, it's just modern, so what do you expect? So that just seemed to be added complications. So I thought it makes far more sense to go with the original carburettor, even if maybe maybe the new carburettor gave you a couple more brake horsepower or something like that. But you know, to be honest, I'm not doing any traffic light Grand Prix, so that doesn't matter. More important to me is that the car actually works, because that's what it's got to do, because otherwise it's just a waste of space. So I'm going to persist with this, the original carburettor, and I now need to decide what I'm going to do with this electronic distributor. Do I try and make it work? I can stay there. Do I try and make this electronic ignition work? Because it seems particularly flaky. Maybe it's just flaky on 6-volt systems, I don't know. But all I do know is that modern electronic technology, with a car which is 73 years old, and you know, presumably not everything is 100% as it should be, or you know, there's always bound to be a bit of wear somewhere in the system. It just doesn't seem to marry up very well at all, whereas the original system just kind of worked. You know, I mean, these are very reliable cars. I mean, how many million flathead V8 engines were produced, and they all had point ignitions, and the Ford carburettor, and they all seem to work. You know, it's all fairly simple. There's nothing particularly complicated about the original setup, and there's enough power for a car like this. It's not like I'm going hot rod racing I'm not taking part in any vintage hot rod events with a flathead V8 powered special or anything like that, so all I need this to do is to work. So I think the best thing to do is probably put it back to original and then work my way back from there and get it to run using the original equipment. That seems to make sense to me anyway. Let me know in the comments if you agree with that. I know there are a lot of people who are very evangelical about fitting modern components to old engines, but from what I've seen so far, it's not always the panacea that people make out to be. So let me know in the comments if you agree, or maybe I'm being a bit of a Luddite and I should stick with this modern technology and try and overcome its frailties to work in this particular case. I'm sure it does work on some cars, but not on every car, and at the moment these upgrades are just not fit for purpose, so it seems to make far more sense to me to put it back to original and try and make it work using the original gear. But like I say, let me know if you agree or disagree, in fact. Oh, who's this? Oh, it's my youthful assistant. What's up?
Right.
Greetings. What do you want?
Nothing, I'm just seeing what you're doing.
Oh, I'm just talking about the joys of electronic ignition. Anyway, indeed, yes. So as a result of these many problems, I've decided to try and get a kit of parts together in order that I can think about putting the ignition back to original. So let's go and have a look at some of the parts that arrived in the post just a few days ago. Yeah, so like I say, the idea is to build up a kit of parts so that I can think about putting the car back to original. So this box arrived the other day. So let's see what we've got in here. So this is an original Ford Distributor. I say Ford, it's probably Lucas. It doesn't actually, I don't think it actually says Lucas on it, but I know some of the distributors were produced by Lucas. And there's the offset drive on the back. And this goes on the front of the engine in the middle of the V. V for V8, of course. And there's a scale there for some timing purposes. But it's actually quite an interesting dizzy because it has a twin point setup on these V8s, which you can just about see there. So you've got a set of points there and another set of points there. I'm not sure if I can turn this over and show them working. Might be a bit fiddly single-handedly. Oh, there we go. If I put it on its side, and then as we turn it, this rotates and it's got the high points on here, and they abut against the heel there and there, and as this spins around it opens and closes these points. So if I spin that, hopefully you can see that working. So it's not too easy to do it single-handedly. It's a bit breezy out here, so I hope you can hear me. But yeah, that's basically the principle of how it works. So this is the original setup. So I thought, yes, let's get some of these bought. So that's that. And it also came with a few other bits and pieces, including this, which is a distributor cap, and apparently this is a new old stock distributor cap, but it appears to be a new old stock distributor cap, all numbered up there. It doesn't actually quite fit on here. For some reason it doesn't quite fit, so it may be, let's just put that out of the way so it doesn't blow away, just wedge that down there. So yeah, whether several different distributors were fitted to these engines, I'm not quite sure, because of course, as well as the V8 Pilot, you have all the American V8s from the 1930s, which used very similar engines. Some of them were different capacities, but were broadly similar. And of course there was the Fordson 7V lorries as well, which also had, or some of them had, the flathead V8 engine. So there's lots of different installations of this engine, so quite why this cap doesn't quite fit on here. It's almost there, and I might be able to modify it to fit, but it's not 100%, so we do need to persist with that. This is called the crab type distributor cap for fairly obvious reasons. More often than not, your leads go in through the top, but in this case they go out through the side, because there's very little room between this and the radiator at the front of the engine there, so hence you've got a cap of this shape. But anyway, we'll see what we can do with that. I may need to get another cap, or maybe another distributor to match this. So we'll just have to see on that one. I'd like to use this cap if I can, because yeah, it's a new old stock cap and they don't turn up every day, so I'd definitely like to use that if I can. So those are in the kit of parts. And if we go in here, we have a set of new old stock points. So we've got a pair of point sets which can go in there. What else do we have? That's the rotor arm that goes in, so that goes on there, so that clicks on there, and as that spins around it distributes the spark to those 8 contacts around the circumference inside there of the cap, and they, via these holes here, send the spark down to the spark plugs in the right order, hopefully. So that's what that does. And in here, I think, in the lovely Lucas box, no less. Look at that, how beautiful is that? Insist upon genuine spare parts. I think we've got a condenser in there, so that's good news. No, it's another rotor arm. It's a brand new rotor arm in there, so that's good. And we've got a few other odds and ends in here. Those are the bolts for the headlamp rims, apparently. So I don't actually need those, but they came with it. So I think the idea is we'll just build up a bit of a stock of spare parts for this car. We've got some brushes here, I think, for the dynamo. So if the dynamo ever stops charging, we've got a chance of being able to rebuild that. I think that's it. Oh, we've got that's for the centre of the steering wheel. Again, I don't think I need that at the moment, but it's always a handy thing to have in. So yeah, so the plan is to build up a stock of parts, ignition parts mainly, so that we can look at perhaps converting the Pilot back to how it should be back in 1950. Of course, if any of you watching this have got a stash of Ford V8 Pilot parts on your shelf sitting there doing nothing that you would like to find a home for, please drop me a note either in the comments or via the old Classic Car website. My email details are all on there. But yeah, like I say, I'm new to V8 Pilots. I've had side valve Fords for years and I've still got quite a few spares for those, but these bigger V8 Pilots are a bit of a new thing for me, so I need to start building up the stock of spare parts just to have stuff on the shelf, because it makes life so much easier rather than having to wait and send away for things every time you need something. So yeah, if I can get another Dizzy and another cap maybe and a few other spare parts like this just to help keep it running, and have a kit of parts in the boot so that I can always look at repairing things at the side of the road if I ever have a failure to proceed, and that would be quite useful. But at the moment I just need to decide whether I'm going to try and install this original setup. Well, after a little bit more testing and pondering and general head scratching, I've decided that yes, I'm going to go with a plan to move back to the original points and distributor ignition. Like I said a moment ago, I did buy all these bits thinking that this would be the kit of parts that I need. But unless I can persuade this Dizzy cap to fit on there, I still need to get some bits. So I think I'll wait until I've got a full kit of parts together, and only then I will start to take this apart. I'll probably have to take the radiator out just to give me a little bit more space at the front. And the other thing I need to do, which I forgot to mention before, on the side of the Dizzy, if we just go and have a look at it over here, there's a thing called a vacuum brake. I'm not entirely sure what that does, but I have read reference to it in the manual that Dennis kindly sent me recently, which is just over on the Big Dodge. And this assembly on the side here is the vacuum brake. Now, the electronic distributor doesn't need any of that, so it's not used. And this is a metal pipe, and this relies on a feed of vacuum from the inlet manifold. But looking at the manifold, I couldn't see whereabouts that would be, where it would take its feed from. But thankfully someone, the chap called Jay on the V8 Pilot Facebook group, sent me a photograph of his engine bay, and I was able to spot that actually connects down. Now let's see if we can actually see it. It's a bit hard to see, but there is appears to be a plug in a hole just over there. I'm not sure if the camera's picking this up or not. See if I can zoom in a little bit. That there, oops, focus, that there is the takeoff, and that provides the vacuum feed to the vacuum brake on the side of the distributor. That's something that'll have to be refitted as well. It appears to be plugged up with something. I hope that's a solid plug that's in there and it's not letting air out, because that won't help it run at all. But I'm assuming that's blocked off. But yeah, that's where the pipe goes in. I haven't got a pipe, so I'll have to make one up. So thanks to Jay for sending me the photo of his engine, just to confirm where the vacuum pipe actually goes in. But yeah, I think that is the plan for this. Try and get it back to something more like the original standard spec, something that's just going to be more reliable. Because as I said earlier, these were pretty reliable cars. They're pretty simple engines, and they would just soldier on forever. Even when they were worn and tired and smoking and knocking a bit, they would still run, they would still start, and they would get you there. And that's how I want it to be. Dependable. It doesn't have to be a traffic light Grand Prix car. It just has to work. Same for all the vehicles here. So I will do a few searches. Just banged into some old radiator surround. Not quite sure what that's off. That's S-type Jaguar, that one there. But I don't know where that one came from. It's a lovely old car, this. It drives so nice. It's such a smooth running car. And like I say, it seems really strange that it starts up on the button OK when it's warm. But when it's cold, it just doesn't want to know. Whether there's something in the electronic ignition that only comes to life after a few minutes of the engine running, I'm not quite sure. Or maybe the oil is a little bit thinner once it's warmed up a little bit, and that takes the load off the starter, so it doesn't tie up quite so much of the voltage when you're going for a start on the, I just don't know, but it sort of does my head in a little bit. And even if you go for the starting handle option when it's cold, it doesn't always start. And yeah, that's just not really a viable way of running a car, to be honest. And even when you're driving along, occasionally I've noticed a slight hesitation, which I don't think is fuel related. I think it is ignition related, so I don't have a great deal of confidence in these modern gizmos. I'd much rather stick with the old tried and tested things. So anyway, that's where we're up to with the V8 Pilot. This little 1950s rack on wheels that I mentioned in a video a little while ago is certainly coming in useful here. Okay folks, well, it's a little bit later in the day, and with a little bit of subtle persuasion, this cap, this new old stock cap, now fits on this Dizzy. Obviously, I'll just check to make sure everything's right inside and the rotor arm's exactly the right distance from the contact inside the cap, and that the bush in the centre here is touching the rotor arm correctly. But on the face of it, I think this will probably work. Fingers crossed. But yeah, it's lovely to see. Look, another nice bit of Bakelite coming back to life. So that's a lovely old thing, that is. Yeah, so I just need to clean these contacts up as well. And as we've got some new old stock sets of points, they might as well go in here. I think these ones are probably usable if I clean them up a little bit, but as they're a little bit fiddly to get at once they're in situ inside the distributor and mounted on the front of the engine, it makes sense just to overhaul this with a new set of points and put a new rotor arm on as well, and just keep these as spares. I mean, I'm sure this one would clean up okay. It's clearly been used, but you might as well use the new parts, and hopefully it'll be a case of fit and forget. Remove to oil. So yeah, you have to oil down in there. So I mean, by all accounts, these are really well made distributors, and I've read various accounts of just what good quality these actually are, the way they're put together, the bearings and everything inside. So that's another reason why I'm quite keen to go back to the proper original gear, because if it was good enough for Henry Ford, then it's good enough for me. Okay, well, I just checked to make sure that the centre bush and the centre of the cap there, which is on a spring, is touching the rotor arm. So I just put a little bit of water on there, just the thinnest wipe, pop the cap on, and the brush was getting damp on the end. So that means that that's going to connect to that okay, because I was a bit concerned that maybe this cap is off another variation of V8 distributor, because that's always possible, especially when there's been so many different variants of the V8 engine built and put to so many different applications. So you're never 100% sure that you're always matching the right parts together. So a little bit of common sense does come into play, but we're getting the contact to there. So fingers crossed this is the right length here in order to allow the spark to jump across to the contacts within there when this is spinning around, you know. So yeah, so I think what we'll do now, I'll go and find some feeler gauges and we will install, or rather I will install, because I don't know where my youthful assistant's gone, I think he's in his shed. I'll install the fresh points in here, and I might have a look, see, because I think I've got some new old stock condensers which look very, very similar to that. So if that's the case, I think we'll probably bung one of those in as well. So yeah, more to do, but we're slowly getting there. Okay, there we go. So we're aiming for about 15 thou on the points. And there is the vacuum brake on the side of the distributor. So that's quite cool. I didn't realise that both sets, that and that, actually have two sets. So it's a car set as opposed to just one set of the new points. So we will definitely be installing those into there. So it's a 4BA spanner for that there. That's it. So as soon as it's loose, you do it by hand, and then you don't drop the nut, because you run the risk of dropping the nut somewhere. So any washers, you always make a note of which washers go where. So take the washer off as well as the nut, and just pop them.
What neat space do I put this in?
Just pop them down there. It's neat enough. Right. And then we can take these two screws out as well. So if you want to do that, there's a screwdriver somewhere over here or there in my filing system. Not very tight actually. So again, once it's going, you can do it by hand then, so you don't drop anything. And try and bring the washers with you. And on some dizzies, you can end up dropping the washers inside the internals of the distributor, which is never a good thing. So if you can just pop those somewhere safe, and any washers.
Two of them.
Yeah. Okay. So keep them all together in the same order as well. It's important to keep them in the same order sometimes. So just pop that down there, and then that one as well. So that's it. Again, as soon as it's loose, undo it by hand, then there's no risk of dropping bits inside. So you've got a spring washer and a flat washer. Okay. So in theory these should come off now. So this one is held on here. It slides onto that post. So you can use a little screwdriver if you want, and just put it under from this side, and try and get underneath the brown. That's it. That'll come off. So that's half of it. So what are they like? They've been used, but they would go again, so we'll keep those as spares just in case. Now, this is the bit that you have to remember. That, before we go too carried away, see there's this fibre washer here. That's really important, because that's an insulator. So so leave that on there for now, and then just lift this off if you can. And it just keeps everything, and the post stays where it is. That's it. And just, so have you got everything on there? Have you got, where's it gone? The idea is to keep everything in order so we don't lose things.
Despawned.
Where's it fallen somewhere? Alright, okay. Let's just find it. There it is. Right, okay, so just pop that onto the base.
That's the inside.
Yeah. Okay. Right, and then all we do is replace and fit into there. You need very thin fingers for this job.
Do I have thin fingers?
I don't know, but we'll soon find out. And then we'll, after these are in and adjusted, I'll have a look, see what condensers we've got. Right, time to do the second set now. So if you take the two screws, undo the screws, and then, or you can take, actually you can take this one off first. Take the bit with the like fibre cam, the fibre heel, rather. Yep. And it pings off somewhere. It's under, that spring's under real tension, so we'll just put that over here so it doesn't get mixed up too much. Right, so now you can take the two screws off, just slacken them off until they're loose, and then do them by hand the rest of the time. They're going to come.
Someone's been at these before, haven't they? Someone showed up.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, get a bigger screwdriver. Get a bigger screwdriver. I mean, that's quite big. It's not very. Just give it a. No. Okay, we'll find a better screwdriver and then give it another go, because we don't want to be chewing anything up. That might work. Yeah, I'll have a go. I'll have a go. There we go. We just found a better screwdriver, and they're all good. So they're coming out. This is the first car I've had that's had a twin set of points on it. I've never had anything like this before. Maybe a bit of an aircraft type thing to have multiple sets of points, but I've never come across it in a car before. So we'll just do the same procedure, clean up the new ones, just make sure they're nice and clean, pop them in, and then we will adjust both sides up for the contact gap. So now we need to adjust both sets of points to between 14 and 16 thousandth of an inch. So I've got the 15 here. Hopefully you can just about see the writing on there. 0.015 is 15 thou. So all we've got to do is get this on the heat. So if we do this nearest one, just watch the light.
That one was on pretty tight.
Yeah, so that one's on there. So that's on the point of that. So that's open. So what we need to do is just slacken these off a little bit. It pivots on that one. It pivots on that one and slides on that one. So you just have to make sure they're both. You only have to nip them back a little fraction of a turn. That's all. That's it. I'll do. And then you can just slide these. It's a bit difficult to do single-handed, but so we'll just move that out a little bit. That way and that way. And that opens it up a bit by pushing that in. So now we've got a really big gap.
That's the thing.
So we've got a huge gap there now. I probably can't see this. So I've got the feeler gauge. So that goes in there.
And then push it.
And then you push that against it, yeah. And basically you want that to be what they call an interference fit. Can't really see what we're doing here. But yeah. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll just slide that up so that's an interference fit in there, and then we'll nip the two screws up, and then we'll do that for the other set of points. Right, so just as a quick update, I've actually gone back and used half of the original set of points, because if we have a look at these replacements, they've got a very wide heel on here, and it made it very difficult to accurately set the points gap, whereas these have got a much smaller, narrower heel on. If you compare that to that, so that is a lot easier to set the gap like that than it is with these. I'm not sure. I mean, it says they are for the pilot, but I don't know, maybe it's a different year of car, but these really wide heels like that make it very difficult, especially as they're slightly shaped. Makes it very difficult to set the gap. So I've actually cleaned up half of the original set of points, and I'm going to reuse those. And the base plates, I've used the new ones. So it's a bit of a mix and match, but as long as it works, that's all that matters really. They've been set to 15 thou, thanks to the feeler gauges over here. So that should be alright. I'll keep those as spares, but I'm not entirely convinced they're right. Actually, I decided to stick with the original condenser, so I'll put it back in, because apparently this did come off a running working car, so I think we'll stick with that and just see how it goes. So we've got cleaned up points, cleaned up the connections on the condenser while it was off, just to make that good, and we've put the new old stock rotor arm back on, so hopefully that'll do. So they're all gapped up, cleaned up, ready for the cap to go back on, and hopefully that'll work. Always helps to have a few spares around when you're fiddling around with this sort of stuff. So I've got some boxes of points, condensers, rotor arms, bits and bobs to make up new plug leads if need be. So yeah, all comes in very, very useful at times. I love these old boxes. How nice is that? Seems a shame to open it. Yeah. You can't be, I mean, everyone used to diss Lucas stuff, saying, oh, Prince of Darkness, etc, etc, but nowadays this is the sort of thing that everyone's looking for their car, because modern repro stuff is usually so poor that this original gear is what people really, really want now for their old cars. So yeah, whenever I see boxes of these, I always pick them up when it's in the car boot sale or at an antique centre. I always grab those, because you never know when you might need them. Oh, Harley's kindly volunteered to clean up an old road mender's lamp of mine. The Kenyon's, what's that saying? Kenyon's something light.
Yeah, mine was called Ken
lens.
This is older than mine.
It's dated 1963.
It might be older.
DCC, so what's that? Devon County Council, perhaps? Something like that. It's quite a nice old thing. It was home to a couple of wasps, so they have been evicted now. It's actually quite a nice thing. It's been hanging up in here for years and years.
Of course, this is your WD-40.
Yes, yes. It usually is, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got my engine.
Have you? Yes. That's looking good. Splendid. There it is, illuminated with a little LED lamp in it, just to get.
Mine's a lot clearer.
Yeah, yours is a lot clearer. The lenses, aren't they?
No, I think the lenses are dark, because my lenses are orange, those are red.
So these are red and yours are...
Yeah, I'll just put them in.
Oh, you brought it with you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, cool.
Cheap Christmas.
Things we get up to. Well, it is a lot brighter, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah.
That is a Bobby Dazzler, isn't it? Old road menders lamps. So do you think they're made by the same person or same company?
Ken Light.
Ken Light, and this is Kenyon.
Kenyon.
Right.
And they've got very, very similar. They've both got. Oh, this is the Kenyon Ken Light.
Right.
This is the Kenyon pattern. So I presume that was like an early
Right.
to that one before they named it.
Got you.
The Ken
Yeah.
Light or something.
Maybe they're used for different purposes, possibly.
Well, I mean, different colours and different sizes.
Yeah, so that's like more of an ambery, sort of yellowy, orangey lamp.
This one's like 70s or something.
I don't know.
It
It could literally be sort of late 60s, early 60s, or mid 60s, late 60s. It's probably one after the other, or maybe for
That
different,
one's earlier.
or maybe for different uses.
Because
Because
this one's got the big handle. It's got an actual.
right, so it's got like a handle
So I
on
would
it.
have thought that would be older. Mine's just this little clip.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, maybe it's for different purposes, possibly. Yeah, they look good. Very festive. Yes, ho ho ho. And there's another one I spotted hanging up. This is a wartime lamp, I think. So it's a paraffin lamp. We've just put the LEDs in for now. And it's got this sort of sticky outy bit for blackout purposes, presumably. So what would the purposes of the green cross
Is it something to do with
and
like
the red
road
cross?
signals or something?
It could be like maybe for controlling traffic in the dark, after hours, during the blackout, perhaps, something like that. If you know, let me know in the comments, please, because it would be interesting to know. This has been hanging up in the garage for a long, long time. There's no obvious maker's mark on it, but yeah, it's quite a groovy thing. Let's see what it looks like in the dark in here. And there we go, with the cap in place That was quite a worthwhile couple of hours I spent out here this afternoon. Do love a bit of Bakelite. Just before I finish up, I just wanted to have another quick look at this Ford Times. Someone in the comments last time when I mentioned this one said, oh, that's not a Ford Pilot on the cover. But interestingly, when I was having a look through that Ford Pilot book that Dennis over on the Isle of Wight kindly sent over recently, I found the original photograph on which this was based. And it actually features in the V8 Pilot book, and it's like a period press photograph, presumably, of a lady, a well-known lady of the time, behind the wheel of a V8 Pilot, and that's what this illustration is based on. So I was right all along. But yeah, I can't believe that I found this, and I bought this years and years before the actual car came along, and it's even the right year and month. So yeah, but yeah, it's really cool just flicking through this book and finding the original photograph on which this illustration was based. Well, at least I found it cool anyway. Anyway, that's a good bit of progress. I didn't want to start taking this to pieces before I had a distributor to hand ready to install and have a go at getting to work. But now, fingers crossed, this one will actually do the job. There's no guarantees obviously until it's on, but if I take the radiator off and I fit the distributor on and just do the wiring, modify the wiring back to how it was originally, I can at least check in situ to make sure it's sparking and all that kind of thing, and then move on from there and make sure we're getting a spark at the plugs, and then we'll have another look at the carburetor side. I may well go and order a carburetor kit for this, the original carburetor. We'll have to see how we go, but for now I'm just going to concentrate on the ignition side and try and get a spark back at the plugs, because at the moment we're not getting a spark at the plugs at all, so that's no use. So a bit of fuel, bit of ignition, and hopefully she'll run on the button from cold as she was meant to, and as she did way back in 1950. Anyway, I hope this short little video was of interest. Just a bit of tinkering here in the garage at OCC HQ. We're lucky today, it's quite mild, but they can't say that every day, so kind of grab your opportunities when you can with this kind of thing. So thanks very much for watching. Please check out some of the previous videos that are on the channel here on the V8 Pilot and indeed other cars that I've tinkered with over the last few years. So thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, all that kind of thing if you haven't done already, and there'll be many, many more videos along very, very soon. So bye for now.